think of our mission as problem solvers in the imagination economy. Imagination economy is characterized, as Henry Jenkins says, by demand for engagement, participation, and emotional connection. And that's really what we call participatory culture. And a lot of the tools of that participatory culture are things like transmedia storytelling and branding, social networks, big data analytic engine, sentiment analysis, second screen, which we'll show you some of the things we're doing, and 5D world building. The problems that we see is that there are threats and disruptions to the general business model on the horizon. And today we're going to try and look at a few of those issues. One is just cries out to us is this notion of unbundling. They're not interested in taking 18 channels that include VH1 classics and stuff that get an audience of 200,000 people if they're lucky. They only want to take Comedy Central, MTV and Nickelodeon. Viacom doesn't want to sell them that. They want to sell them the whole bundle. It's a sign of disruption that's coming in this world. And in some ways, the world of Facebook and the world of machinima are keys of a new kind of network that is emerging already. The second one is this notion of privacy and big data. All of you are being tracked in ways that maybe you're not really aware of. We can see that some of these ideas that we've put forth are not that far into the future.
Our job on this next panel is to be provocative, to survey the big landscape, and to think about some of the changes that are impacting television in particular. And what's been, we think, a year of disruptors, of game changers, of decisions and events that are going to reshape media as we know it. What's the advantages and disadvantages of the bundle as it exists today, and who wins and who loses if we move to a world where things become unbundled?
The bundle of the newspaper was what helped finance what we like to think of as so much great journalism, and of course the classified section and the crossword financed a lot of the reporting that was done overseas, et cetera, that couldn't live on its own. So though I do think that consumers clearly benefit when they have access to the world's newspapers and to information from so many new sources, there are serious questions about whether that is a trend that can continue and consumers continue to be served if the economics of the news production business just don't hold up.
I think in the entertainment business you have to have bundles because you can't, nobody can make a living selling only hits, right? Because nobody knows what's going to be a hit until it's too late.
You're going to see a world where we believe everything's going to be driven through people. I think Facebook as a platform and a discovery mechanism plays a central role in that.
It's really hard to say, the data is going to tell us what's good.
I don't know that the data is going to be completely perfect to tell you what's going to work, but it is going to tell you, wait, millions of people are talking about this sci-fi franchise that's about war called Halo.
Or why
I'll probably have a better
bring
shot.
Up Veronica Mars?
Yeah, well, that's the next thing. Rob Thomas finances the production of a new Veronica Mars film, at least partially on the basis of funds raised from fans via Kickstarter, breaking all records at that platform by raising more than $2 million worth of production cost in a single day.
Actually, if you think about Walking Dead and Talking Dead, right, it kind of gets to this point. Talking Dead is a bigger hit show than Game of Thrones from an audience perspective. And it's all about just talking about what I just saw, right? And so I think that the second screen experience, and obviously Xbox and all these guys are focused on this as well, of what are my friends saying, what's going on in my community while I'm watching this thing, oh, maybe I should be switching. That's going to be really powerful.
On one side, everybody seems to say that privacy is really important, and I'm sure everybody on the panel would say this, and all my colleagues tend to say this as well. But on the other side, consumers don't seem to care that much. I mean, they seem to be perfectly happy to use free services from Google and giving out all their information. And certainly that's definitely true of the younger generation who live their lives out in public on Facebook. Sometimes they're a little bit queasy. They think about how much those companies know about them, but not queasy enough to change their behaviors.
Users don't understand what's going on online. The reason they're not freaked out is because they don't get it. People really genuinely do want privacy, but they don't understand that they're making decisions that undermine that.
As a consumer, I really don't like the idea that by confusing me, you can take private information from me. And we really feel that one of the things that's missing and that we've been working very hard on is actually putting privacy controls into the hands of consumers.
Nobody cares about privacy in France, as you said. Why? Because I think that technology goes that fast, but we don't protect private life. There's no legal laws around private life. It's more like jurisprudence that has to define the boundaries of private life.
The concept of privacy, I think for most of the public, is something they really didn't think about very much until very recently, until the last several years. And we have Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin, and privacy means a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. We can be talking about surveillance, we can be talking about marketing, we can be talking about data aggregation, and all of these things have different costs and different benefits, and people can make decisions and may have very different decisions or very different attitudes towards different uses of their personal information. But I think to me the most appealing idea is the concept of trust, right? So the idea is I want to be able to, I expect Facebook to treat me a certain way. I have certain expectations about that, or consumers have certain expectations. Sometimes they're not stated or they're not even consciously conceptualized, but they're implicit assumptions about how we're going to be treated.
I do believe that you can't trust anybody on this, on big data, and we do need a United Nation of big data, supranational, we would say, authority that could give us trust on this.
We have over 28 to 30 different federal statutes that deal with privacy, but we don't have one that's just a general protection.
So that is the sort of thing where you could see privacy, instead of being treated in the United States as this concept of notice and choice, in Europe it's a concept of consent, but you could instead see a move of, well, let's treat it more like spyware, let's treat it more like security, where users are not expected to make decisions because they're just too hard. Instead, we will protect users from the threat of having data collected. There's huge losses to that change and that model.
If privacy is a topic that doesn't have importance, it's amazing how many conversations that we're having about a topic that has no importance. I have a feeling that this is one of those topics which will slowly self-correct over time.
Posited 4 possible worlds, and these 4 possible worlds may seem a little exaggerated to you, but that's part of the point, is to see, what this might bring to us.
It's a brainstorming session. For the first half hour, you'll focus on brainstorming. Then there'll be about 20 minutes for you to step back as a group and reflect, pick out interesting patterns to present, interesting findings you have and surprises are great. You can brainstorm innovations, opportunities and solutions which don't necessarily have.
By definition, the status quo implies an industry that's all about self-preservation. So their behavior is very sort of defensive in nature and protective. Innovation is occurring, but it's mostly sort of as a defensive maneuver against externalities where there's a lot more innovation happening.
The story here is that if you look at the dashboard, most people here agree that that's probably not going to happen. So if actually these industries are successful with that particular dashboard, then that actually poses a real huge problem. Because the kind of things that led to that success make these two types of innovation very different. So if indeed no bundling, the other things, look at that first graph, happens, and everything still gets great for these players, then that's going to actually build up a problem that will eventually emerge later down the line. It could be 2020, But that's a problem. So again, that's what the story is here. That was a very difficult particular piece for us to address, and all the members of the group did a great job, but that's what happens. 800-pound gorilla in the room. You're successful by doing the same things you've always done in an environment where change is absolutely necessary. That's a problem.
We were obviously on the side of this privacy power, which is the world where privacy is tantamount. Everything needs to be opted into, and you have to agree to participate in any sort of divulgence of your privacy. Really, it is disruptive. So they would definitely have to reinvent themselves in some way or another. It's kind of hard to tell what the effect is, but obviously from a monetization standpoint, what they're monetizing on today is, I don't want to call it exploiting your privacy, but using your privacy. So they would have to change that, obviously.
For government, it's going to be focusing on maybe antitrust regulation against search engines, right? Because if things are unbundled, people are going to rely more and more on search. But the opportunity for advertisers is knowing who the actual audience is. So because it is digital, because you're getting the content anywhere, anytime, you can measure that, right? And so for them, it's a true value. So I think I've heard someone already talk about Nielsen. It's no longer this unknown number, but it's a real tangible figure.
Everything becomes porn or PBS. Okay? And by that we mean either it goes to big mass market money makers, or it goes to individually supported people putting their money where their mouth is kind of stuff. We also said that we thought social networks themselves would probably die if there was the inability to do any search or discovery because of strict privacy controls. And if that's the case, everything becomes much more local in that sense. And so in some ways, Kickstarter is a way of having super locality by finding like people across a geographical space.
I guess I'm still questioning the assumption that search takes over everything when you flatten. I think of it as something like search, but maybe it's social. Maybe it's some other discovery method, but I don't think it's Google. I mean, it may be Google in some other form, but it's not a blinking cursor in a blank text box.
What was most surprising to me was the conclusion that most companies could probably adapt to the unbundling scenario, while a strict privacy regime might cause real disruption to both search and social networks.
Transmedia is not a question of how do you reach across and jump across multiple media, but how do you bring the consumer into the circuit in a brand new type of way? What are the kinds of relational architectures, systems of engagement you can create around your media? So, for example, if you want to think about what may lie under certain types of engagement, let's take Kickstarter, something talked about a great deal. Now, I don't know about you folks, but when I do invest in a Kickstarter program, actually I have a great deal of fun following it and seeing if it's going to pass it up. And we reach the goal. And what happens afterwards, it becomes kind of a form of engagement that I have. I often don't expect to get much, but it's kind of like being an angel investor, which you screw up quite often. That there's a sense of participation through that act that I think actually creates a fair amount of meaning in one kind of slice of this type of game.
Where do we go from here? I think one of the things I just heard from John that's a challenge to us is to try and maybe marry some of the transmedia production capabilities that we've begun to build in the lab to the big data analytic capabilities so that both production and analytics become part of the way that you tell a story and so those are two work streams that have kind of kept separate, and we're beginning to pull them together in the playground. But I think there's many other possibilities with the way we think about this notion of transmedia branding. I think this was a big experiment on our part. We didn't know if it would work, but my sense is it did work, and it worked because you all really hung in here and were willing to play with the models.